Shawn Ray here for the Generation Iron Network. We're heading into the Joe Weider 53rd anniversary Mr. Olympia weekend in Las Vegas. That's coming up September the 16th and 17th. And we've got a huge lineup of lists of guys that are already qualified. Some of these guys may not be competing, but we do know they are qualified to compete. We might as well start off with the reigning, defending, 6-time Mr. Olympia, Phil Heath. I mean, I don't do predictions, but I think it's pretty safe to say that Phil will win his 7th Mr. Olympia title and tie the Governor, Arnold Schwarzenegger, with 7, joining a very exclusive elite group of guys like Lee Haney and Ronnie Coleman. Each of those guys have 8, and if Phil wins coming up this September, he will join that group and he will be 7. 7-time Mr. Olympia. That's huge, considering that Phil started off his pro career back in 2006. He won the Shawn Ray Colorado Pro Classic right there in his hometown out in Denver. So he's come a long way. He's gone over to Spain and he's won the Arnold Classic in Spain. He's won over in Dubai and he's kind of shut it down. He's exclusively focused on the Mr. Olympia, and with that, he's got the advantage because he's only got to compete 1 time a year. And so far, even on his off season, he looks like a Mr. Olympia winner. And right now, I'm gonna put my money on Phil Heath winning number 7. Let's go into who else is in this competition. We gotta talk about Brandon Currie. Right now, Brandon Currie is probably the bodybuilder of the year. Brandon Currie pretty much uprooted himself from his 4 children and his IFBB pro wife, Brandy Lever, to go all the way over to Kuwait, train at the Oxygen Gym and work with Beta Budai. And what happened? He goes over to New Zealand and he wins, taking out Dallas McCarver, and then he goes over to Australia and wins the Arnold Classic Australia. He adds that to his already impressive resume by winning the Arnold Classic over in Brazil. So right now at about 5'6", Brandon Currie is talking about coming in right around 230-ish, and I know Chris Cormier's over there and he's training with a lot of the bodybuilders. I mean, Brandon Currie right now, I believe he's a lock for the top 10. How far up in that top 10 lineup, I'm not so sure, but 4 kids training over in Kuwait. I think this guy's got a lot to prove, and he's gonna do that this coming Mr. Olympia weekend. William Bonac, he took 5th place a year ago. William Bonac represents the Netherlands, and he's another guy, 5'6", he's a pocket rocket. He's got so much muscle crammed into such a tiny little frame that if he's not careful, he could potentially spill over trying to get bigger and take himself right out of the top 5. But if he comes in anywhere like he did last year, he can serve notice to several of those guys, most notably the aging Dexter Jackson. Dexter Jackson is the winningest pro bodybuilder of all time. He's got 9 Arnold Classic titles to his credit, and he can add that to the 2008 Mr. Olympia Championship that he won, along with the Masters Olympia Championships. There's no bodybuilder more decorated in the history of the industry than last year's 3rd place finalist, and that's Dexter Jackson. Why do I call him old? Because he's old. He's gonna be like 48 years old in November, but man, nobody is doing the business of bodybuilding like Dexter Jackson. Dexter Jackson is one of those guys that as he gets older, he actually gets better, or the gene pool just isn't coming up behind him. But Dexter's one of those guys that literally on paper, you have to count him in the top 3. And potentially right now, he's poised to be in that top 3. And if Phil Heath slips up or some of the other guys, Dexter Jackson, we know we're gonna get nothing but consistency. Speaking about consistency, how can we ignore Big Rami? Big Rami representing Egypt, training by way of Kuwait. He's out there with the Camel crew and the Oxygen gyms. Big Rami has taken a full year to try to correct all of his weaknesses. Most notably, his weakness is his calves. I mean, we can't ignore that. But then again, Dexter Jackson won the Olympia with no calves. Lee Haney's calves were very average, along with Ronnie Coleman. So the calves, we can take that out of the equation. Big Rami is big, B-I-G. And right now we saw a couple of pictures online and he is very dry, very hard. He's headed in the right direction. He switched up with his training. He's working with Chris Cormier. He's working with a whole new crew. And right now, 2 weeks out from the Mr. Olympia, he looks like he is Mr. Olympia. He's one of those guys that's like Dennis James in the gym. Dennis James, back in the day, he was Mr. Olympia in the gym, but he would mess up come the day of the show. Big Rami has been improving as he continues to compete. He doesn't compete a lot, but he did beat Dexter Jackson and Shawn Rhoden at the Kuwait Pro last year and arguably could have won the Arnold Classic over in Spain a year ago. So Big Rami right now, I have him poised to crack that top 3, potentially give Phil Heath a run for his money. Speaking about the run for the money, we can't ignore Shawn Rhoden, Flexitron. Shawn Rhoden was last year's first runner-up, very quiet throughout the year. One of those guys that's got a beautiful body up on stage by himself. Shawn Rhoden looks like a work of art, but then he gets exposed when a guy like Phil Heath stands next to him. You can see the weakness, especially in the triceps. Also, you can see the weakness when they turn around to the back. The back just doesn't have that grainy, crevasse type look that Phil Heath represents. And he loses a little bit of points when he opens up to the back double bicep. So right now, Shawn Rhoden's best bet is to come in hard and come in dry. His thighs are on the verge of being too big for his frame, but he's got one of those tiny, tiny little weights. And he was criticized last year for not keeping it very tight and dry throughout the show. In between the poses, Shawn Rhoden has a tendency to relax. And when you relax, he's exposed. Those pretty lines, they disappear, and they could work against him. But right now, he's second place a year ago, and he has to fight very, very hard to be in condition to try to hang on to that. I don't particularly think he can take Phil Heath out unless Phil Heath falls off the wagon, which I highly doubt. 6 years, Phil Heath has been the real deal. I don't believe that Shawn Rhoden's gonna be the threat that he was a year ago. The Frenchman, let's move over to France. We ended the year last year in December over in San Marino, and Lionel Bayeki finally landed in the winner's spot. I mean, here's a guy a year ago standing next to Kai Green in Brazil, and some people arguably said he pushed Kai Green right up against the ropes. Well, when we got to Italy last year, Lionel Bayeki pretty much nailed it. He closed the door. He was hard, he was dry, he was symmetrical, but that was in December of 2016. He actually had to pull out of the Arnold Classic I guess it was in March, for reasons unknown to me, but that much time off for Lionel Bayeki can only mean one thing. He's got to be very desperate to actually nail it on the day. And I expect Lionel Bayeki to be in that top 10. He is like a Kai Green version of a physique, but he's got much more rounder, fuller muscle bellies. And for that, he gets criticized for carrying a little bit too much water. So if this guy dries out, Lionel Bayeki could arrive. But speaking of arrival, Rolly Winkler. There's nobody bigger than Rolly Winkler. And I've said it a million times. Rolly Winkler looks like he's about to explode. And literally when he's posing, you can almost see that he's one breath away from just like a balloon. He's got the biggest arms on the stage. His thighs are really, really big. The one thing that he's gonna have to pay attention to is that as he gets worked throughout the prejudging, this is notorious for Rolly, is he starts to sweat. When that water starts coming out, his tan becomes a mess and he just fades right from the get-go. So if I'm Rolly Winkler, I'm posing all the way until the Mr. Olympia contest, until all that water winds up on the floor. Dry out. Rolly Winkler really, really dry is very, very dangerous. And this is a guy that got his pro card by winning the Arnold Classic Amateur only a few short years ago. But Rolly Winkler is qualified. He's a bona fide top 6 competitor, but only he controls whether or not he stays in that top 6. But I can tell you right now, if he comes in a little bit watery, it's gonna be curtains for him. Speaking of beautiful and classical, how can we not talk about the Arnold Classic champion 2017? The military man, Cedric McMillan. We've been waiting for this guy to arrive for a number of years. I remember when he came in the Mr. Olympia and he didn't even make it to this stage. After the press conference, something went wrong and he wasn't able to compete. A year ago, I believe he was like 7th or 8th place in the competition. And then this past March, he finally winds up in the winner's circle of the Arnold Classic Championship and takes home the prize money. Now, he has a very good opportunity to put an exclamation point on that Arnold Classic title by showing up, breaking into that top 6 lineup, and serving notice that he's still got enough gas in the tank to potentially one day be Mr. Olympia. What can you say about Cedric? There's nothing wrong with his physique. It always comes down to conditioning. He's arguably the tallest, with the shapeliest physique. There's nothing wrong with his body, but he has to nail the conditioning. That's where Phil Heath typically exposes his competitors. But Cedric McMillan, in my book, is a top 6 finalist for this year. One of the guys that qualified, Sergio Oliva Jr., he won the New York Pro Championships this past May, but he's not going to be competing in this competition. He's already on record as saying that his wife had some immigration issues. She lives over in Australia, and that was a very strong driving force for him to go on and win that New York Pro Championships back in May. But now that that pressure is off and he's qualified for his very first Olympia, he's got to get his family life right. And if the head ain't right, the body doesn't get right. So I'm sure Sergio will be at the Olympia, but I highly doubt that he'll be in it. Another guy that qualified is Victor Martinez. Victor Martinez winds up qualifying by winning the Muscle Mayhem show out there in Missouri. And the question is whether or not he's going to be in the contest. I know he's getting a little older. We talked about the legs getting a little bit smaller. That Olympia stage typically is not the same unless Victor Martinez is on it. And he's a guy that wins. He doesn't just come there to compete. He goes there to try to win. But I believe it's a long run for Victor Martinez. By the time that Olympia comes, again, I think if he's in the show, He's not going to look the way that he did at the Muscle Mayhem show. And we all know that that show didn't have very good lighting, but he looked phenomenal. I just have a tendency to believe that right now some younger guys are going to come up and give Victor Martinez fits. That's if he's in the competition. We got a rookie that's qualified, Gerald Williams. He won the California Pro Championships. Very pretty physique. He won it in a very weak lineup. The knock on Gerald, his arms, they're just not there yet. They're just trying to play catch up. I think there's a genetic thing going on. They're just not matching up with the rest of his physique. He won the California Pro by being a very complete bodybuilder. He's got a pretty physique. Still a lot of maturing to do, lots of filling out. He's a guy that's just going to happen to enjoy his first experience at the Olympia, but I highly doubt that he's going to be cracking the top 10, not this year. Michael Lockett, what are you going to say about Michael Lockett? He wins the Chicago Pro, and then he goes down and he wins the Vancouver Championships. Michael Lockett's a guy that when he's in shape, he makes good bodybuilders with great genetics look bad. He doesn't have the best genetics. He doesn't have the most complete physique. I believe one leg's larger than the other. But what Michael Lockett does do is he gets in shape and he gets rewarded for that. He's not getting to this Mr. Olympia the easy way. He had to win 2 shows. And by winning those 2 shows, he solidifies his ticket to the Mr. Olympia lineup. I don't expect him to be in the top 10, but he's not gonna be somebody you're gonna ignore when he walks on stage. I believe he's gonna try to look his absolute best. Josh Lenarkowitz, all the way from the land down under. A year ago, he did like 8 or 9 competitions. He finds his way back to this show by winning the Tampa Pro Championships. Now, we gotta wonder whether or not he's mentally gonna be ready to do this show. One of his good friends and his training partner and his roommate at the time, the late Dallas McCarver, he was the one doing the mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. He was the one trying to bring his friend back to life, and it didn't work for him. And what does that do to a guy's psyche? I mean, Josh Lenarkowitz actually pulled out of the Arnold Classic in Australia because a family member passed away. And he wasn't there. This time he was present with his training partner and his good friend, 26 years old, Dallas McCarver. How do you process that a few weeks out from the biggest show of your life? 1 or 2 things. Either you bite the bullet and you do this for your friend, you do this for your family, you do this for your career, and you focus on the job at hand, or you step back and you start trying to figure out what you're doing with your life and what mistakes did Dallas made and try not to make the same mistakes. So right now, I think with all the things going on in bodybuilding, Josh Lenarkowitz has more questions that he's got to answer than these other guys that are just laser focused on the Mr. Olympia. Josh is going to be one to look out for, but if he's ready, he'll be in the top 6. There's absolutely no question. Johnny O. Jackson, a former USA champion, is back. Johnny O. Jackson somehow pulls the rabbit out of his house. He goes all the way down to South Africa and wins that competition, and he takes out Victor Martinez. Victor Martinez had won the Arnold Classic over in Spain before. He's won an Arnold Classic in Ohio. Victor Martinez was 2nd in the 2000 Mr. Olympia, and Johnny O. Jackson, at the tender age of what, 45, 46 years old, takes him out, which gives him the confidence to go back to the Mr. Olympia. I was with Johnny Jackson last year when he retired. He came out of retirement to win the 2nd Arnold Classic down there in South Africa, right behind Dexter Jackson. So I believe he's re-energized, I believe he's focused, I believe he's excited. He did beat an Olympian in Victor Martinez, so I believe he's got the belief that he can be one of those guys battling it out for the top 10. That's about as far as I'm gonna go with Johnny Jackson, because he does have flaws. His legs are really diminished and the calves have never ever been there, but he's got arguably one of the best backs and the biggest traps and most full arms in all of bodybuilding. So you can't count Johnny Jackson off. Even with a physique that's not balanced, he's one of those world-class champions that could crack that top 10 in that lineup. Let's talk about Nathan Diash. He's coming all the way from the UK. Nathan Diash is a former Lou Ferrigno Classic champion and a guy that won the California Championships. He is a very good quality bodybuilder, still a work in progress. He's got a little bit more maturing to do from the back. He's really pushing the envelope on the size. He's got to be very careful that he doesn't lose that aesthetics in his waistline. And he definitely has to come in condition. If he's not in condition, he's going to get beat by guys that don't deserve to beat him. But Nathan Diash is one of those guys that we got to keep an eye out for because he's a very good bodybuilder. Let's go to the Czech Republic. Luke Osladal. He won over in Brazil. And I want to say he kind of came out of nowhere, but he's kind of always been around. I'm almost certain he might have been a 212 bodybuilder, but this competition wasn't that deep in the lineup. And he didn't get a really good look in terms of publicity following winning the Arnold Classic in Brazil. It moved from one city in Brazil to Sao Paulo, Brazil. and not a lot of guys were there. And so you have to have, by default, a champion, and Luke Ozdal won this competition, and he's a good little bodybuilder, but his medal will be tested when he stands amongst the best in the world. But even if he doesn't do as well as he would like to do personally, he's representing the Czech Republic. And there hasn't been anybody from the Czech Republic on that Olympia stage to do much of anything in many, many years. So I'm gonna be looking to see what Lucas does in that competition lineup. And at the end of the day, it pretty much is going to cover the guys that are qualified because we don't have any more competitions. The Mr. Olympia is right around the corner. 53 years this competition is going on, and my money right now is going to be on the defending reigning champion, Heath.